Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod, it's Tea Day. President Trump's tariffs possibly taking effect this afternoon.
As we've been saying for days now, the details all quite unclear.
What is clear? Uncertainty for automakers, grocers, and consumers. And for Ontario Premier Doug Ford, frustration.
He calls it Liberation Day. I call it Termination Day because people are going to be losing their jobs across the U.S.
Plus, TikTok buyers are lining up, and OpenAI has made its very first cybersecurity investment.
When I was sitting with you and all of a sudden you broke out your phone and said, hey, do you want to hear yourself? I was sort of in shock.
These AI voice impersonations could threaten your family's peace of mind. CEO of Adaptive Security, Brian Long, he says the risk is growing.
When I started talking to customers about this a little over a year ago, I would have about 5% of executives that hadn't experienced an attack at their company. Now it's probably about 30-40%.
It's Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Tariffs, set to be announced this afternoon. It's going to happen in the Rose Garden at a ceremony there at 4 p.m. The White House saying the tariffs will take effect right after they're unveiled. So it's not like there's a couple of days, a week, a month, or anything else to take place in between. But as we've been saying for days now, the details all quite unclear. The president and maybe his closest advisors are believed to know. I'm not sure they all know, but we'll see. In the past week, Trump has considered blanket tariffs on everything from the U.S. imports and reciprocal tariffs that vary based on country. Yesterday, the Journal reporting that Trump's advisors were trying to formulate a new potential strategy, a less intense across-the-board tariff on a subset of countries. So maybe this is all still a moving target, unclear. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent telling lawmakers that today's tariffs will represent a, quote, cap, and that countries will be able to take steps to alleviate them. That's according to the Oklahoma GOP representative Kevin Hearn, who spoke with CNBC's Emily Wilkins. So there's going to be a lot of horse trading and negotiating after this, I imagine. We're going to be speaking with the Premier of Canada's province of Ontario, who has tangled with the Trump administration on this very topic in a very vocal way. And we're going to see him this morning.
Well, he may be able to tell us if there's any progress on USMCA, because we still don't know whether those goods are not going to be.
I don't think he's going to know whether there's progress.
Whether he was going to talk about it with, about maybe, and I don't know if
That's been part of the problem is that the other nations involved in this really haven't gotten much signaling either, because I'm sure we would hear more leaks if that were the case. But to this point, it's been pretty tightly kept.
I don't think there's any negotiation. I think this is the negotiation.
Right.
This is the first step of a long negotiation.
Right. This starts, and then we see how people respond.
Meantime, President Trump expected to meet with Vice President J.D. Vance and other advisors today to consider an offer for TikTok. As that deadline nears to a deadline here, try to keep the social media app running in the U.S. At least that's the goal. Reports characterizing this as the final proposal ahead of April 5th, when TikTok could face a U.S. ban. Potential suitors for the short-form video app now include former Los Angeles Dodgers owner Frank McCourt, who's been on our broadcast to talk about it. Reddit co-founder Alexis Ohanian is in the list. Wyoming entrepreneur Reed Reisner, and companies include Blackstone, Oracle, and Andreessen Horowitz have all been flagged as potentially being involved in one way or the other. President Trump saying over the weekend that a deal with China's ByteDance to sell TikTok would be struck by this coming Saturday. But Trump has also said he could extend that deadline. And given the tariff situation and the negotiation with China over tariffs, the question is, how does this become, or does this become, another chess piece in that?
These are some serious people that are involved at this point. It looks like. And in the past, we've had, I don't know, they were going to go.
Oh, I would go the opposite way.
Well, they were going to go in front of Shark Tank and Kevin O'Leary, and they were going to have TikTok, with.
Well, no, but I was going to say it was serious when Microsoft and Walmart and Oracle were involved.
I'm talking about Kevin O'Leary.
But this group, to me, they're all interesting people.
You're talking Frank McCourt and the rest?
Yeah, I don't know whether any of that really.
The Oracle piece is a very interesting part of that. But I guess the question becomes, even if a deal was struck, if China's government would go along with it, and how that rolls up.
Do you ever think that O'Leary's consortium was really going to buy TikTok, Mr. Wonderful?
I was not sure, and I don't know if Frank McCourt's will buy TikTok either.
Yesterday was a Tuesday, so it's not always elections, but we've been closely awaiting some of these. There were 3 of them, really. And NBC News is now projecting that in Wisconsin, Supreme Court judge candidate backed by Democrats has won that contentious race. Susan Crawford's win allows liberals to maintain a narrow majority in the highest court in the Badger State, cheese state. Technically, the race was nonpartisan, but it drew outsized attention as the first major battleground of state election of President Trump's second term.
There's a lot of money on both sides.
A lot of money because they're going to redraw some of the districts, which could change the makeup of the House in the next midterms.
So what do you think this makes? What do you make of Elon Musk's influence? Or
I think it was I think it was a long shot, kind of a fool's errand. He didn't, to him, $2 million. I don't know how much he poured in.
I think it was $20 million.
Yeah, but
not a couple million.
Also,
I mean, that's a lot of money.
I think that judge who won raised twice as much as the judge who lost, who was backed by Elon Musk.
Right.
And there was money that came in from Soros and from some other.
Right. There's money
as well.
on all sides. It may be more interesting or more important, and I don't know how you read it, but down in Florida, NBC News projects Republican candidates have won in a pair of special elections, which will give the GOP a bit more breathing room in Washington. Jimmy Patronis has been on the show a few times. Florida's chief financial officer won in the race to replace Matt Gaetz, the former Republican congressman, and Florida Republican Senator Randy Fine won to replace U.S. Representative Mike Waltz, who's now obviously national security advisor. Both of those were big Trump wins, 33 points in the one where Randy Fine won for Trump. He won by 14. And then in the first...
I thought it was 17.
Right. I got 14. Was it 17?
I heard somewhere.
There's another one. What would you have for the other one? I got 15 for the other one versus a 32-point Trump
This was
margin.
the one that people were watching more closely because that was the one that even Kevin McCarthy yesterday said might only be a 6 or 7 point.
And so was it outperformance then, or was it underperformance from Trump, but not as bad as what people thought?
Right.
I guess that's how you read it. I mean, those are comfortable margins in both places, but not nearly what Trump won, obviously. But I think that after that state Senate race in Pennsylvania, I think people were wondering whether you could actually lose.
That was brought up as a huge issue.
Right.
Again, there was a lot of money that flooded into these two races as well.
Right,
from
much more than
national places that would come in.
Right.
Because that's and by the way, that's where dark money can usually make a difference.
What was it in Wisconsin? Was it 100? They said, or what did McCarthy say yesterday? 100.
Well, the reason why I was so focused on it was he was focused on Wisconsin as sort of the.
No, I know.
I thought he thought that Wisconsin was more important than Florida.
No,
the implications for the
for that.
Said about it, and this is.
But no one thought really deep down.
I mean, I think that most of the news stories did, and I think that Elon Musk went there to go do this.
Right, no, they were trying, but Wisconsin Trump won by less than 0.9 of a percentage point in Wisconsin. I didn't think that was going to happen.
Okay.
What happened was it was status quo was preserved in all 3 of these races.
Right.
Basically is what happened.
Right. Yeah, it would have been, still thought it was, I think that's why he was so interested in it and said things like the end of Western civilization. I don't think it was ever likely really to flip, and it didn't.
Coming up next on Squawk Pod, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, a vocal critic of today's looming tariffs. He says it'll be a rude awakening for many American workers, but he's still willing to negotiate with President Trump.
He knows, and Secretary Lutnick knows that we're willing to take these tariffs off like in the next minute if he said he's taking their tariffs off.
Welcome back to Squawk Pod from CNBC. Yes, it is T-Day, the built-up, awaited day for the Trump administration's rollout of expected tariff policy. Hours before the president's planned Rose Garden remarks, our Squawk Box anchors spoke to Ontario Premier Doug Ford. The Conservative Party politician has become a surprising antagonist to the White House, calling for retaliatory tariffs against the United States. Ontario is a close neighbor with an economy heavily dependent on the U.S. auto industry. Here's Andrew.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford, we very much appreciate you joining us this morning. I imagine you're going to be watching and listening to the president later today. But even before we get there, have you had any meaningful conversations with this administration about what these tariffs could look like?
I have, Andrew. And first of all, thanks for having me on. And I always start every interview. Canadians love Americans. I love America. And they're just an incredible neighbor. And saying all that, I had a conversation last week with Secretary Lutnick and just told him how we feel. And it's going to hurt Americans. It's going to hurt American jobs. It's going to hurt investments. We've seen the market tumble. I'm sure it's going to start tumbling again today because people don't want uncertainty. Markets don't want uncertainty. And I've never seen anything like it. Attacking your number one customer, President Trump is, not the American people. President Trump's attacking their number one ally, their number one customer. And it's going to be unfortunate. He calls it Liberation Day. I call it Termination Day because people are going to be losing their jobs across the U.S. You can't just all of a sudden put tariffs on every part and every widget that comes across the border. Ontario alone employs over 9 million people. They wake up every single morning to produce products for Ontario. That's Ontario alone, not mentioning the entire country.
Do you expect this to be a negotiation, meaning there has been a sense implied or otherwise that we're going to hear a number, whether it's 20% or something else, as a sort of top, and that if folks like yourself come forward and say, you know what, we're going to take some tariffs off of this and we're going to do this, perhaps that those tariff numbers come down?
Well, let's hope so. Let's sit down and discuss this because it's just going to hurt American jobs. I can't stress it enough. And, you know, again, he believes he's supporting Americans. He said he was going to create jobs, create wealth, reduce inflation. It's worked the total opposite. Inflation.
But do you think it's fair that you have tariffs on a whole number of products?
That's right. And we'd be willing to take those off tomorrow if he took all the tariffs off. We are not the problem, Andrew. Do you know what the problem is? China's the problem. And he's taking a blind eye to China as they continue to build their critical mineral mass. We have all the critical minerals that our great neighbors need. We have the energy that our great neighbors need.
I just want to go back for a moment. If, in fact, you're prepared to take your tariffs off, why wouldn't you have that negotiation and that conversation now before any tariffs get put in place?
Well, we've had this conversation for over the last month. We don't want tariffs. We have another $65 billion worth of tariffs to launch today. That's the last thing we want to do because it's just, again, it's going to hurt both countries. It's going to hurt American workers. That's the last thing I want.
Andrew meant take the other ones off, not the ones you're launching today, the ones that you already got.
You're saying you take all your tariffs off. I'm saying
we will take them off. That's right.
Then why is that not? I guess my question is, why has all of that not already happened? And does President Trump know that you'd be prepared to do that?
He knows, and Secretary Lutnick knows that we're willing to take these tariffs off like in the next minute if he said he's taking their tariffs off. So let's look at the auto sector.
So how much of this then is some kind of theatrical dance between both yourself, frankly, and the administration? I mean, it sounds to me like if you're prepared to take yours off right now, he should be prepared to take whatever we would implement, and we wouldn't have this conversation. What I can't figure out is whether both of you are waiting so that you can say that you've both won in some way.
Andrew, let me be very clear. We didn't start this tariff war. You know, a tariff on Canada is a tax on Americans. Simple as that.
But you've already got tariffs, Mr. Premier. You say you didn't start it. You already have all these existing tariffs that you're willing now to take off. We're putting them on today, right?
Joe, you've had these tariffs. I mean, we're getting tariffed on, the auto parts, for example, is a big part of our economy here. And right away, I had a conversation with the Prime Minister this morning, and I can tell you one thing. If he dropped all the tariffs, we'd have zero tariffs. We'd grow as I say, you can't unscramble the egg, you have to make a larger omelet. And I believe in the AMCAN fortress.
Premier, this is the idea that you're prepared to get rid of all of your tariffs is exactly what President Trump wants. And by the way, he would take that as a win. I mean, I think he'd take this interview as a win if in fact you're saying, okay, we'll do no tariffs, because then he should do no tariffs.
That's right. But right now, he's doing tariffs on the vehicles, right? So we're proposing the tariff, I should say. So it's just this tariff war between the two greatest countries is ridiculous. Again, we didn't start this. We want to build a relationship that we've had for 200 years.
I thought you were going to come down and have some conversations about the USMCA and some of that stuff. Maybe that wouldn't be. You did have that. Was there progress? Is it possible to talk about?
Joe, I thought it was a great conversation. We're dealing with very bright business people. There's no doubt. Secretary Lutnick is bright. So is the president. I'm not too sure if they understand the supply chain system between Canada and the U.S. It's so integrated. It's been that way in the auto sector since 1965, and it's worked. And we buy as many cars as we sell down there, and the ones we sell down there, 50% of them are made from American parts. Compared to Mexico, we buy 400% more cars in Mexico, 200% more than anyone in the world. Let's get back to growing our economy and strengthening our borders from China. As we're sitting here, China is building up their critical minerals and cutting the U.S. off. We have those critical minerals, and there's no one else I want to share them with than our greatest friend and ally.
Peter Welch, a senator from Vermont, he pointed out that he's been talking to small and medium and large business owners in Vermont.
China tariffs are one thing. They've been ripping us off for decades, and the president is standing up to them. I support that. But Canada and Mexico, where we have this USMCA agreement that he negotiated, by the way, and has been beneficial all around, why unravel that? The Canadian tariffs are particularly troubling for me in Vermont. That's our biggest trading partner, but it's the biggest trading partner for 34 states.
It is obviously the largest trading partner, Canada, for Vermont. He pointed out how crazy it could get if USMCA wasn't followed under some of these issues. Like if you have timber that is sent from Vermont up to Canada to be milled and cut and then sent back, and it gets tariffed on either side of that. You could be talking about some pretty substantial changes. Are these conversations you have had with members of the Trump administration?
I had the conversation with the Secretary Lutnick. He knows what's at stake. We're the number one customer to the U.S., number one trading partner to 28 states. Again, Ontario alone, Ontario would be your third largest trading partner in the world, over $500 billion of two-way trade. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I just want to build our relationship, strengthen our trade, and keep an eye on the people that don't like us. And there's one country that doesn't like us, and that's China.
What has the administration's response been? Do you feel like you have an understanding of whether there's going to be room to negotiate, or do you feel like you're just waiting to see what happens at 4 o'clock and then see any conversations that take place after that?
Well, I'm hoping there's room to negotiate, because if we don't sit across the table, this just escalates. We need to bring the heat down right now and, come with common sense solutions. And I'd be down there tomorrow to talk to Secretary Lutnick. I talked to him the other night. I asked him, what are we expecting April 2nd? And he said he wasn't sure. Now, I don't know if he was blowing smoke or he really didn't know what to expect. Maybe it's the latter. But I have a great deal of respect for Secretary Lutnick. He's a smart person, smart business person. We need to get rid of these tariffs and focus on our real enemies around the world.
Doug, I was looking for an article I saw recently that said Canada, one thing they can do to just reset their entire economy is just to embrace the energy that you're able to provide in such an energy resource. Do you think Mark Carney Do you support him? Is he the right guy to be leading Canada at this point with his, I don't know, he talks about climate justice and climate this, climate that. I don't know. He definitely is a zealot. Is that the guy that you would prefer to be running the country when you need fossil fuels and exporting fossil fuels?
Yeah, and I'm not going to jump in the middle of that.
Please do.
No, just hear me out for a minute. I'm not jumping into the federal election, but I will tell you, I believe he believes in building pipelines all the way east, all the way west, another one south, and another one north. I believe in the critical minerals. He believes in one-window permits, so we can get that critical minerals shipped down to our closest friends and allies. We have more critical minerals than anywhere in the entire world, and there's one place I want to ship them, and that's down to the U.S. And we have 33 of the most critical minerals right on your doorstep. 50% of the high-grade nickel that the U.S. uses for their military, for their aerospace and manufacturing comes from Ontario. Let's ship you more. Let's ship you more electricity.
I guess getting back to our original point that Andrew was making, you're talking about the retaliatory tariffs that Trump's putting on, and you kind of keep dodging the point about the original tariffs that were already existing that Canada had. And why not get rid of those, and then maybe there wouldn't even be retaliatory tariffs? Why not do that first?
Well, I think he has to look at the tariffs that he's put on Canada. I think we need to sit down and let's get back to a USCA deal instead of a USMCA deal, because Mexico is bringing in cheap parts from China, slapping on a Made in Mexico sticker and costing American, Canadian jobs. So let's sit down, clear the slate, and let's move forward.
We got to go. Unfortunately, we're up against a hard break. I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you'll come on back, and I hope this does get resolved one way or the other as soon as possible, given just all the uncertainty that hangs over all of this. So good luck with that.
Thank you, folks. God bless America. God bless Canada. Let's get this done.
Tease will be next.
Coming up, AI Joe, Becky, and Andrew. We're going to talk deep fakes and protecting against them with the CEO of a company that just got an investment from OpenAI.
Tips to minimize your risk, like deleting your voicemail, and artificial intelligence TV anchors.
Do people actually fall for this stuff?
Yes, they do, AI Joe. This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Becky, Q.
You're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
OpenAI making its first cybersecurity investment. It's a big one. It's in a company called Adaptive Security, which simulates AI-powered cyber attacks and provides risk assessments. Today, the company announcing it raised $43 million in its latest funding round, which also includes and was led by Andreessen Horowitz, OpenAI's startup fund as well. And I should say, we met, and he played this, it was almost like a party trick at a lunch on me, where all of a sudden I started to hear my voice off of his phone. The Squawk Box team gave you some, the show gives you it. So take a look at, or a listen at how this all works. This is a sample of our own AI-generated voices, and you can start to think about how scary this can really be.
Let's talk about the tech. Are deepfakes really that big of a threat to companies right now?
This is Becky. Just to make sure I understand, you're saying this kind of attack is already happening in real scenarios?
Hi there, this is Joe Kernen. Someone gets a recording of my voice from, Squawk Box clips online, and then they can just call up our finance team pretending to be me. Do people actually fall for this stuff? I mean, wouldn't someone notice it's not really me on the other end of the line?
So joining us right now, first on CNBC, is Brian Long, who's the co-founder of and CEO of Adaptive Security. I did say, I mean, it was a little bit different, and maybe it's because we know what's going on. You can hear it in the voice.
Yeah.
But like when
we're looking for
when I was sitting with you, and all of a sudden you broke out your phone and said, "Hey, do you want to hear yourself?" Mm-hmm. I was sort of in shock, and the idea that somebody could call somebody I know and say, "Hey, this is Andrew," and ask somebody to move money on my behalf is sort of a shocking and scary thing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, and the technology is getting better and better every day. So I think it's about 85% the way there today, but I think in the next year you're going to see it hit the mid-90s. And I think beyond just hearing the voice and likeness of the individual, and this is really important, it's not just voice and likeness, it's trained in all the open source information out there about you.
Right.
So clips about you, information about you, etc.
With no secret things.
Well, the other thing that came out of our little lunch together was, I now have a password for our family because you and I discussed this idea that somebody could call you, you could think it's your son or your wife or your daughter or whatever, and ask and know enough about you based on what's on the internet to maybe have like a genuine conversation. But if they don't know this one little thing, maybe that's going to. So in the business context, is everybody going to have a password? If you're the CEO of a company who has to interact with a CFO, for example, because you don't want the CEO, the fake CEO calling the CFO saying, hey, you got to move X amount of money to transfer money to so-and-so.
Yeah, so 2 things there, 2 tips. I think number 1, you do want to make sure you have some sort of passcode, particularly for things with family members or something in your company that's a really important transaction. And then number 2, I would definitely delete your audio voicemail on your phone. So, when someone calls you, if it's your voice today, change that to the robot. You do not want your voice out there, especially if you're not a public person. Public people like you guys,
it doesn't matter for us.
You're going to be out there. But really what we're going to see happen at a lot of companies on these attacks in the next couple of years, they're not going to target the CEO or the C-level executive. They're going to target the controller. They're going to target the people in middle management where they can get your voice in just 3 seconds from a voicemail and then become them, right?
Or they can call you at home and you answer the phone.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can find anyone's phone number, almost, over 90% of people's phone numbers we can find in seconds online.
But how worried are you that in this goes back to the larger question maybe about social media, in a universe where everybody is sharing, potentially oversharing, and there's video of, we're obviously on TV every day, but I would say a good portion of America in some way or another is actually talking on either video or audio on things all the time now.
It is. And look, the number of these attacks are up by a tremendous amount. They're up by 17x last year. There are over 100,000 deepfake attacks in the U.S. alone, and we're going to continue to see that exponential growth.
What's the worst or most clever attack you've heard of so far?
There was an attack that got a little bit of the news at the end of last year in which someone did a deepfake impersonating the foreign minister from Ukraine and actually had a deepfake phone call with the chairman of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee and was able to gather information. There's a lot more of these attacks happening every day. When I started talking to customers about this a little over a year ago, I would have about 5% of executives that hadn't experienced an attack at their company. Now it's probably about 30, 40%. And it's kind of your classic when you see a mouse, there's 20 more in the wall situation.
What does your product do exactly?
Yeah, so what our company does is we help prevent these type of AI-powered cyber attacks. And we do it with 2 things. Number 1, we simulate AI-powered attacks so we can figure out what those attacks might look like at your company. And then number 2, when someone fails one of those simulations, we then train them on what not to do next time. So we try to bring that risk down.
If I have a cold, am I not going to be able to get through the security as myself because I don't sound like myself?
I think you're still going to be able to get through it as yourself. And frankly, being able to detect whether it's you or a deepfake in the next couple of years is going to be nearly impossible, right? Because it's just going to get harder and harder to tell the difference. I think what companies are going to have are just better controls.
Well, how does your company, if in the next few years it's impossible to tell the difference between a deepfake and a real thing, how does your company have a future?
Yeah, so we simulate those attacks at businesses in order to figure out where a company's controls would fall apart, and then we train those individuals on how to follow those controls.
There are companies, for example, that work with, there are security companies that work with big corporations, for example, to perform phishing attacks on employees just to see who's vulnerable, who's not. Is that what we're talking about, but in an AI context?
That's exactly what we're talking about. But in the AI context, those attacks are not just happening on email, where predominantly these attacks historically, you've probably gotten emails about it. Where they're happening now are over the phone. So real-time voice phone calls, SMS-based messages, even over video chat and Zoom, where we don't have the protections that may exist in email.
Two pieces of news you can use, I'm curious about. You can actually spoof your own phone number now, or attackers can spoof a phone number so that it would show that Andrew Sorkin is calling somebody else. How does that work? Just so we understand it. And what are we supposed to do about that?
Yeah, so look, I think when you're getting a phone call, you really need to not trust who the person is on the other end. There are ways for individuals to make it seem like they're calling from someone else. And the scam's getting bigger and bigger. I had one of these voice attacks actually call me yesterday. So again, you need to be careful. You need to really be thoughtful when you're hearing someone answer things, particularly when there's a lot of urgency around the request.
How did you know it was a scam? They asked you for money right away?
Yeah. They were trying to get into a cryptocurrency account, and they were saying they were calling from that account, and they had my information.
And then if you combine this deepfake with Oz Perlman, and he's there.
The magician.
And then they say, remember the go-kart thing he came up with? Yeah. They know he knows all your secrets. So any passwords or what's your favorite winter sport, he knows. So you can't stop him.
I think
you couldn't stop him. Just give up.
Oz is amazing, and it's also hard to compete with Donut Day. But look, I think that beyond that, the thing to remember here is that instead of it just being an individual on the other end of the scam or on the other end of the attack, it's AI. So it can operate at unlimited scale. It can call every single person at the company, and it only needs one of them to work. Where historically, they would have to go through the list and they'd only get through a few people.
Terrifying.
Now they can call all 50,000 people at a company and get through it.
That's terrifying.
Brian, thanks for scaring us this morning. Congratulations on the new funding round. We appreciate you coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
And that is Squawk Pod for today. Go change your outgoing voicemail message. Probably too late for me. I already voiced this podcast. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern. Or get the best of our TV show right into your ears when you follow Squawk Pod. Follow this podcast wherever you listen. Have a great day. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.